Hello and welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm Mike.
And I'm Jose.
And today we're talking about Licorice Pizza, Paul Thomas Anderson's new film. And we're joined by my brother.
Yes, Stephen Glass, who aside from being Mike's brother, is also a graduate in film studies at Warwick. He went to the London Film School and is a filmmaker.
And he's a huge fan of Paul Thomas Anderson. We had him on to talk about Phantom Thread a little while ago, which was a great conversation. He's also a fan of Haim, the band whose members appear in this film. They're a family band, three sisters. They all appear in this film, including the parents. Alana Haim is the main character. I think you've seen them live, haven't you?
I saw them live, yeah, at Alexandra Palace. I made a T-shirt.
Right.
Yeah. I've seen them live.
That's part of the reason that I wanted you on, and also because I kind of thought I'm probably going to not like this film very much. And I was right. Mm-hmm. So luckily we can turn it over to
you two. I thought that might be the case. Okay. Yeah. I've seen it twice. I saw it whenever it opened here towards the end of December. He's put out 70mm blow-ups of the last couple of films of his.
Right.
And they look really interesting compared to, it's one of the interesting things. It's one of the things that I can imagine people being cynical about, but I'm in the bag completely. Yes. So I'm interested. But I do think that his films can take a little time and some sympathy sometimes to give them a second and a third go so that they become a lot more cohesive. And I definitely found that was the case second time around with this. Partly it also looked better the second time. The 70mm blow-up was really interesting to look at, but I think it was all soft. Like the projectionist had it out of focus and I didn't want to get up and leave. But I can still enjoy the film. Second time I saw it yesterday was a 35mm print that's going around, which looked gorgeous.
This looked gorgeous.
This looked great. The 35mm print, yeah. Because I'm sure I'll never see it like that again for a long time, and I'm sure it will look amazing on digital. Either way, point being, I think it coheres a lot more the second time around, and I think that can be increasingly true of his films.
I just to register an objection, I guess, because I think it almost feels like a backhanded compliment to say you've got to see this film twice before you warm up to it. Or whatever. I loved it immediately. I think it's fantastic. And I think it's almost a once-in-a-generation film because it kind of brings forth new archetypes, really, that are like instantly likable. So I know, it's meant to be referencing American Graffiti and films like that, right? And I think it kind of does its own thing with that. So actually, what I'd be curious is to hear from your brother. What didn't you like? Mm-hmm. Why did this film piss you off?
It didn't piss me off.
Actually, that would be the exception,
It didn't piss me off. I just... I didn't get on with Inherent Vice, and I saw it. Mm-hmm. I anticipated it having some similarities to that because of the period and the region in which it's set. And one of the things that I never got about Inherent Vice was the feeling of it being a hangout film. Mm-hmm. I tried to watch it again recently, and I didn't hate it, but I got about 10 minutes in and thought I turned it off, and I didn't feel interested enough to go back and see it again. Which is not the case with the Paul Thomas Anderson films that I really like. Which kind of grab me and I stick around with them. I kind of anticipate this having a similar thing, and I think it does. And I think that part of that hangout thing is probably what Stephen says as well, where it probably coheres more on a second viewing. I can imagine that being true. It's a little bit spotty, maybe, but part of it is you want to love being there with these people. You want to be interested in these characters. You want to hang out. And I didn't. That's the thing. I wasn't that interested in them. The film is so clearly built on a love of the place, the era. I mean, Paul Thomas Anderson grew up here and everything. Licorice Pizza is the name of this record shop, chain of record shops that was in his area when he was a kid in San Fernando Valley. And all the American movies and TV of the time, which I know little bits about, and some of them I know quite a bit about. And recognise how the film is kind of playing on them, the way American kind of variety TV looked back then, that kind of thing. But you have to love it as well, I think. And I don't care. I don't care.
Well,
I don't know if it's necessarily that I think it can obviously help, like with anything. If you go in loving it, then it just reflects more of that back at you. But I think the thing is so inviting, and I think one of the things that makes it hangout, I think there's a certain quality that, I think this crosses over with hangout films, but I think it's something that is partly his style, is that things are not. I'm struggling my way there. He follows characters to where they go rather than building a traditional structure. And I think this has it feels like the loosest of his films in a long time, or the loosest entirely. But I think it would be wrong to think that that means that it's lazy or that it's sloppy. I think it takes an awful lot of careful work to create something that is such a rich texture. I think one of the things that I'm really interested in with Paul Thomas Anderson is that he makes, these aren't just period films. There's something about them that's historical films. And I think part of the achievement of them is how incredible the production design is, and how he looks at these places and how lived in they feel and how real. And I think that means more than just surface.
Jose and I were just remarking upon, because Jose saw that the budget was $40 million. And he said, there were a few stars in it, but no one's going to get paid that much because the stars in it have small roles and it's not going to be like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I said the money has to have gone on making it look like 1973. And the production design and the work that's gone into that is extraordinary and so convincing and beautiful.
Yeah, it's an unbelievable achievement, even on top of his previous films. And he's, Phantom Thread is something, it's just magnificent the more you look at it. And this is great. And I don't know how much more interesting it could become the more you live with it and the more you watch it. But I certainly find with his other films, they just keep opening up and changing and re-revealing. The more you see them and the more you see the next thing he's done and how it makes you reflect on all of his previous films. He's a really deeply interesting filmmaker in that way.
This is very interesting because it feels both very personal. It's clearly his childhood. It's my childhood. I even recognize some of the news reports on the gas shortages, right? I think I remember that footage, from when it first screened on television. So it's kind of, it's my period as well. I would have been about 10 then. But I also think it's his most likable film. I think it's his immediately most likable films.
Yeah.
If you don't like that young boy and that young girl, there's something wrong with you, I think. Right? Like, that 15-year-old hustler, chubby, really sure of what he wants, completely in love with her, so in a way physically fumbling in, but actually mentally very secure in what he's doing. To me, that is like a fascinating character, right? And
I agree.
It's like she made me laugh out loud, and the responses are original. Actually, I think I really laughed out loud at 3 or 4 moments where I thought it was almost inappropriate, but it just, the kind of the actor just pushed me there, and I think that is something kind of quite extraordinary. I don't think I've seen characters. They remind me a little bit of characters from the past, right? So there is a little bit of Barbra Streisand circa, 1969, 71 in that character, right? So it does remind me a little bit of that. But actually, Barbra Streisand didn't play a character who was having an affair with a 15-year-old and who barely looks much older herself, right? Yeah. So I think these are original characters, and they're very warm and likable characters, really, and characters where you just see them and they contain a whole backstory just through little things, right? You get the sense that this is a child actor, that he's been supporting his mom, right? That his mom is entirely dependent on him, that the only reason they have a business is because of how he keeps it together. Yeah, the film doesn't tell you that, right? But just through kind of a few actions and a few lines, you get a sense of that world, right? And her rebelliousness towards, her father, again, it's just a couple of lines and a whole world comes into place. Yeah.
So I think it's more than a couple of lines with her, to be fair. I think everything you see in her household, certainly early on, I think it's quite a rich portrait that's painted of what a depressing life she basically has at home, and why she would go to dinner with this kid on a whim. Why she would seek to escape. I think it's more than a couple of lines. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm saying it's quite richly done.
That's funny. I certainly didn't think of it as being depressing. I think that's one of the things that I think, again, is something that's characteristic of his films, but it's so much the case here. I think I completely agree with Jose from the lead characters down. they're cast so interestingly. So everybody comes with, even the people that you know the bare minimum of. A couple of the kids who I remember remembering in the end credit sequence and going, "Oh, that kid," and I know that kid and I know his personality in the group, even though you get so little of them. I remembered the second time round how much I was thinking a lot of the time about Greg, his little brother, who barely says a word. I think he might just have the one line when he says the phone's ringing, and he's just taking the piss out of his bigger brother. And the reason why, he becomes quite a big character, even though he's off screen later on when Gary decides to flood John Peter's house, and it's like he said he was going to kill Gary. And you remember this. I certainly the second time round, but more the second time round, thought, God, that's such a huge part of Gary and who Gary is, and part of it is just how much you're given in the early stages of the film, which I think he likes all of his characters. I don't think he's somebody ever that actually dislikes any of his characters. I think not to disagree with you thinking that the home life is depressing, but I think
depressing maybe wasn't quite the right word.
I don't think the film takes sides against her family. You can see why she would find it depressing, I think, is what's key. I understand why they like living there.
Yes, that's what I meant. Depressing was maybe not quite the right word. What I meant was you could see why it's somewhere that she would seek to escape from, and why she would decide to. Because initially, when Gary's trying to pick her up, she's laughing it off. I mean, she's 10 years older than him. Of course, it's a joke. But once you see the home life, you can see why actually, on a whim, she might go with this. See something else.
Again, not just to be disagreeing, but I really didn't get that feeling at all. I read it completely differently. I mean, she is 25 years old. She's got a job. If her home was so unbearable, she could have moved out already. She's not a baby. She's not like 17 or 16 like he is. Yeah. So if she's so uncomfortable there, she could move out. Obviously, that home and her sisters and her mother and even her father's, he's a pain in the ass, but he is looking after her. And that must have a value to her, or she wouldn't remain there.
Right. Well, that's
So I don't find it.
We're talking a matter of degrees. We're saying she doesn't have enough impetus to move out, but she has enough impetus to go on a date with a 15-year-old kid.
Maybe she likes a 15-year-old kid. Maybe the 15-year-old kid is charismatic and dynamic and after her, in a way that no one else is. Maybe the kid is the attraction, not her running away from.
Certainly. I mean, she's not going on a date with any old 15-year-old kid. But I think that's part of it. That's all.
All this is to agree ultimately with your point that these things are really richly painted, and in such a concise way for one thing. But I think this all agrees ultimately with your point that these things are interesting, and these are interesting people that we're talking about. We're not picking out whether or not a film was good or bad. It's like these are real people, and you get a long time to spend with them, and you get really interesting pieces of their lives to look at.
And I also think you get really evocative, almost in a sensual way, pieces of history. So, when they go on the plane and they have those rubber earphones, right, which I remember, and they're talking about how wonderful the food is. Yeah. And their experience of being, how amazing it is to be on a plane, right? There's something about the film that so vividly evokes that experience of, the magnificence of being on a plane in 1973, right? That it's almost a visceral way of evoking that, and the film is full of elements like that, which I just loved.
I completely agree. I think that kind of the only thing that I would add is just that how much fun it is in this case. Like, it's such a joyous film, like you say. That scene on the plane, the way that Gary is. He sits there and he's like, the food is magnificent. It's something he said over and over and over. And it makes him such a teenager that he picks up on this adult word and gives it up after 3 or 4 days. He forgets about it and finds something else, which is really key of him. Like, he gets her on a date and then just sits panting by her. But I think what I was going to mention was, in that sense, there's a real comparison that has been made and, that you could get a whole conversation from about this being his Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. And having that interest in the textures of history. But I think his project and his end, where you get from that is very different in Paul Thomas Anderson to Quentin Tarantino. Part of it's the way that it hems much closer to actual history rather than enjoying getting far away from it and doing things like killing Hitler.
Actual history and actual people. I mean, I think these feel like people I would know. Yeah, or people I kind of recognize, or kind of people in Tarantino's films are always like on their, sketches on their way to iconicity or something. They never feel like real people.
It's funny as well that you mentioned it being like his version of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, because that occurred to me as well, and partly because on the way into Birmingham, I was listening to the podcast that we did together on Phantom Thread, and in that I said that Phantom Thread was like his Grindhouse. Evocation of a period, whereas with Paul Thomas Anderson, the period in the filmmaking was more 40s. I felt that he was kind of evoking similar sort of thing. And these two directors, Tarantino and Paul Thomas Anderson, are like darlings of film Twitter. We obsess. The latest, whatever is going to come out, that's their latest thing, is obsessed over. And it's funny to think of like those key differences that, as you say, like one of them is all surface, and the other is finding something much richer beneath, actually finding real people, which is definitely what he's doing.
Well, it's much more closely and intimately related to reality without taking that huge circle that Tarantino takes. I think there are things in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood that are so human and so moving, but it's in an entirely different way to a Paul Thomas Anderson film. It goes through iconography and through sort of artificiality back towards the real, which I think he is interested in. Quentin Tarantino.
Yeah.
Paul Thomas Anderson, it's more like you're going inside history. It's like he might go slightly parallel by not making it John Holmes in Boogie Nights or not making it L. Ron Hubbard, but they walk alongside each other and he just stays in this slightly imaginary space. And I think what you can get to is something that, I don't know how else to put it, but the inside of history. It's like seeing people in history and revealing something through his interesting ways in. Like in Phantom Thread, you can imagine reading a line in a history book that says, it's suspected that so-and-so dressmaker had this odd relationship in his marriage where his wife poisoned him a couple of times. And he finds that, and it becomes this prism into some really interesting truth about people through a history. That was quite lucid.
I wanted to ask you to put this a little bit into the context of, his other work, because I find this his warmest and most likable film. There's something, I admire all his films, but if you look at The Master and so on, there's something a bit cool, objective, distancing about all of those films, I think, including Inherent Vice. Whereas this, to me, seems almost like, immediately like kind of likable and open and loose, and really warm. And at the same time, it's dealing with a specific period, which really must be his place in his childhood, right? And I just wondered if you had any views on that and how it compares to his other films, maybe.
Yeah, I think it's completely it's open arms for a hug from the beginning. Previously, it would probably be Phantom Thread is very, very funny, but in quite like a film from the 40s way. It's not warm in the way that this is. There Will Be Blood and The Master are things like, I think because they're led by the characters they are, the tone of them is much more, it's not warm. It's not cold, but it's not inviting and generous in the way that this feels. And even Boogie Nights, you don't love it in the same way as this. It's much more like it's a fun movie and it's an exciting movie. And not that this isn't both, but it's spending time with family in a way that the other films aren't. They're these giant, particularly Boogie Nights, which is the most fun, probably.
Yeah, but there's also something tawdry and seedy and sad about Boogie Nights, right?
Yeah.
By its nature, right? And when I think of the things with The Master, and you think of that scene with Sister, whatever her name is, masturbating the Philip Hoffman character to just get him off. There's something kind of cool and brutal and controlling and a power fight that's evoked by that moment. That's the opposite of falling in love, right? That you get, that kind of feeling that this film evokes. I do think I see it as something unexpected in Thomas Anderson for me.
I'm not sure. I think we've seen that warmth before, but I do know what you mean, though, about it. This is more... what you said about it being like a warm hug, I kind of get that.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, I also think that there's a whole dimension to this film that I think is really unlikable, which is the phoniness of the world in which they live, right? You get these kind of real people who are searching for this connection, which is what they ultimately get at the end. But California, I mean, it's based on a character who's hustling. He's trying to set up businesses, make money here, there, and everywhere, trying to get into acting. And then we see this whole world of child actors and so on. And that's all really, really phony and fake, and constantly just telling people what they want to hear. You know, the whole thing about going for an acting job and saying, yes, I can do everything. I can horse ride, I can do karate, because that's what gets you the job. And then
that is what
if you get the job. I know, I'm not saying it's not true. And then you get the job, and then you know, if you get the job, you have to try and learn to do it later. But it's all really fake and full of lying, and like it's about confidence, I suppose. I mean, that's what the kid is full of, is the confidence to make the next hustle work or whatever. But I find that really, really unlikable. I don't think it's a pleasant place to be.
I find it likable because it's not like Sammy Glick or somebody. It's not somebody hustling somebody else and cheating them, right? This is kind of finding a way of making people want this stuff that you're selling, right? And actually, a lot of, you know, the conversation between the both of them, make it sexy or whatever. It's, you know, he's not conning these people. You know, he's not selling them some shit that they will get home and then, you know, they will realize that they've been ripped off. No, he's selling this dream. Yes, this is what you want, right? That is what he's doing. And actually, that connects very well with the films and the references to things like Lucy and to things like the William Holden film and Breezy and, you know, all of that, right? Kind of, you know, the references to John Peters. I mean, you know, John Peters himself was like the biggest hustler of all time, right? Like, you know, he went from being a hairdresser to being the head of Sony Pictures, right?
Yeah, I'm not saying it's not true. It's definitely true. That's what La La Land is.
Yes.
But it's not likable.
Well, it's not unlikable.
Well,
I mean, you know, for a lot of people, that is a very attractive thing and a very certainly a very American thing, which could have moments of unattractiveness, right? But The Master was also a little bit about that element. What was the Andrew Carnegie thing about how to make friends and influence people? Yeah, there's like a whole kind of, you know, mentality about that, right? Like, you know, it's like the American, what is it, the salesman, right? You smile and brush off the thing and go on to try to make the next sale, right?
Yeah, but in The Master, I think there's a critique of that attitude where here it's kind of embraced. It's charming.
It's interesting that whilst talking about how easygoing this was, it was still interesting that Jose mentioned that it was a kind of interesting, in comparing the older films to this, it was, you mentioned power dynamics, and you see that throughout, especially previous films, like Phantom Thread is a relationship and it's shifting power dynamics. And that's the case with The Master. There are three central characters and it shifts between them. And this is still just as much about that. It's this constant seesawing between the two of them, in which things like meeting John Peters and finding or bumping into different people become tools for basically this power struggle between the two of them. But I agree. I see what Michael means, but I think it's very consciously and very deliberately taking a very, it's got a loving and a generous eye towards history, while it still doesn't shy away from showing you or noticing things along the way that are ugly. As like from the very beginning, the girl, like she gets slapped on the arse by the high school photographer, and you go, that's the end of the scene. And that scene was gorgeous, but it's just got that little thing there that for me doesn't make it an unpleasant place to be, but it dips into those things and you realize that's just part of the texture of this.
Yes. Noticing is the right word for that, I think, but it's also true, particularly with the sexism towards Alana. There's a whole thread of that, and thread of sexual threat towards. I mean, the whole thing when she's going on that dinner date with Jack Holden, the Sean Penn character.
Yeah,
there's an element of threat to it at the start. It's a feeling of
she's thrilled though.
Oh, she is, but there's also that feeling of this is what gets me the job. I have to sleep with him. There's a threat of that at least, and then it becomes that she's just ignored because he sees his old mate, and it all just takes off in a completely different direction. But actually, that whole thing, that whole dinner, and going on to the motorcycle jump thing, all wraps up, I think, really nicely, actually, when the two of the kids come together at the end again, and he basically, you know, she kind of winds up somewhere that she's more comfortable, and he reaches out to her by running over to her.
For me, what illustrates this, you know, best is the scene with the politician, who's gay, who's hiding an affair, who's clearly under surveillance and potential blackmail from somebody else, who's negotiating all of these things, who is in fact trying to do something good, and actually who's filmed to look like a real beauty. The blue of his eyes, those eyelashes. And he's filmed just from overhead to make those eyelashes, evident. And again, I think that gets to something in this film because it's a very unusual beauty, right? Like, he's fleshy. Yeah, you could see how filmed a different way, he might even seem an ugly man, right? Yeah, but he's filmed to be beautiful, to highlight those things that make him beautiful. And on the other hand, he's a politician. He's not what it seems. He's trying to sell something so that he can be elected, so that he can do something, right? So actually, I think that gets to that dichotomy of America that, like, these are like good people trying to do good things, but nonetheless, it requires a sale. It requires, like kind of a sales pitch. Yeah, and a maneuvering of unpleasant realities. And nonetheless, the idea that someone would look on this gay politician with the sympathy that we look on him today in 1973 would be absurd.
Mm-hmm.
Did you think it rang true when Alana hugs the boyfriend?
Yes.
Yeah, I thought so.
I was touched by that.
Yeah. I mean, that's actually the whole region of the film where it started to pick up for me again, because I did like it at the start. I thought it was kind of charming, and then it just lost me for so long when I thought this is going nowhere. And then this hidden relationship between the politician and his boyfriend comes into play and is revealed, and all of a sudden it's rich again, and there's stakes, which I think is something that I feel is lacking for a lot of it. There's stakes in their relationship, and you understand the dynamics very quickly. And although it's ultimately kind of their part in the film is wrapped up quite quickly, it only comes in towards the end anyway. But I thought that was a really beautifully put together portrait of these two people and the tensions that they face personally and professionally. It was a really lovely little just kind of sketch, it felt very deeply felt.
Impeccably and beautifully well balanced, because I completely agree with everything Jose's saying. That character, Joel Wax, is made gorgeous, and there's these giant close-ups of him, and he's doing things, and it's such a careful scene to go through line by line, where you sit on her for such a long time and you figure out what's going on as she gets disappointed. And you're also hearing these two characters, and for not 1 second do I take completely against somebody at the end of the scene. You totally understand and are on side with Joel just as much as the guy that he's sending home to keep himself secret, to keep himself closeted. And it's I'm not putting it very well. I just think it's brilliant just how well balanced it is, and how I come out feeling equally towards everybody. You could so easily have fallen into the politician being the selfish arsehole at the end of that scene.
I think there's an element there as well, which is the creation of narrative tension. Because you've seen the guy spying outside, you think he could be someone from the BFI, he could be someone from the press, right?
The BFI.
Either thing would ruin his career. And there was this moment where I thought the boyfriend might be recording it, right? Because he keeps repeating those lines. Does this mean you don't want to come home with me? Does this mean, like, it's almost as if you want him to say something. And I thought, this is being recorded, right? Like, and so actually then that creates this kind of tension until you realize, that's not what the scene was about. But the combination of that type of questioning with a man waiting outside created this layer of tension, of other type of tension that I thought,
that's not something I felt. So I didn't feel a suspicion about that, but I can see why you would. When you said BFI, did you mean FBI?
FBI, yeah, because and actually, it's interesting that I couldn't quite figure out whether the guy was a journalist trying to expose the politician, whether it was a member of the FBI, or
I thought it might just be an assassin,
or it might be a mafia person. It could, And actually, it's so interesting if you look at those three things as interchangeable.
Yeah.
My first thought was someone he knew, a boyfriend or an ex-boyfriend. But then that was like, it just, part of that might be, I don't know. But I agree with you that it's...
But that could be a threat in itself if it's someone who threatens to expose him because of a previous relationship. That's a possibility.
Yeah. And then in the end, it's just that person hanging around that, if anything, reminds you of, seems like a combination of Taxi Driver and that guy that walks around in Nashville holding a guitar case.
Yes.
Just seems like this strange intersection of the two. I don't want to spoil the end of Nashville, but there's a guy who walks around with a guitar case.
All right, does he become important?
Well, everybody's important, but in that sort of slow build Robert Altman way that, you know.
I wanted to ask you about something you said right at the start about the freedom, the looseness of the film. You said something similar as well, I'd say. Because in a Paul Thomas Anderson film, you're saying, Stephen, that you don't know where the characters are going to go. He follows his characters where they go rather than building a path for them. And it strikes me here that actually their plot is quite rigid, and they really saw where it was going to go. And when it comes to the build-up towards the running towards each other at the end and this ultimate, finally a kiss, it felt to me like that I'd been building towards that the whole time. It's not quite a meet cute at the start, but they meet and then they kind of play off each other for a little while, and then they split up. And I thought, well, that is pretty classic. Sort of, you split them up in the third act to get them back together right at the end. It felt rigid is a little unfair, but it didn't feel like I was following the characters where they went. They were fitting into a genre.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah, it's interesting. It's funny that there is something that's that kind of simple about it. It does break them up after a fight, and then they come back together to get back together and probably have a fight again at some other point in the future, if they even know each other. But I see what you mean. I suppose it's partly, what do I mean to say by that? Part of it might be that I would have no idea of predicting what the things they're going to get involved with, which test their relationship. I would have no idea of knowing where they are. I wouldn't know that at some point in The Master we're going to wander off and ride bikes around the desert. And I like these people, and I know that I'm going to enjoy his characters, so I'm curious to see what odd directions we go in. But I see what you mean. It is completely a romance in that way, where it's these two people have to understand that they're completely in love with each other from the very beginning. But they fight and they tussle and things are in the way.
And yet they know. And yet they know. You know, she knows that he's completely in love with her. And, you know, from that moment where she follows him to the station, he knows that she cares for him. So then, you know, from very early on, even they know. It's just a question from like knowing in a deeper or, more complicated way, or be more certain. But actually they know from the very beginning, which is partly why I think the film works so well. Yeah, that kind of, I think, you know, it's just a way of them finding out what they already know and what we know, right? So you're kind of seeing those developments. That deepening is what you see. And I think there are two things here that are very interesting. For me, the importance of seeing it through a kind of a nostalgic gaze, right? Because I was trying to figure out, why do we see the shots as we do, right? Like, I think you mentioned this. It seems like, you know, the background is always out of focus, or there's a kind of a haze. You know, it's shot through windows that reflect the inside and the outside simultaneously, but that makes any of the images kind of hard to put in focus, right? Yeah, that kind of style of shooting, I associate it with a kind of a nostalgia, or a partial view, that only certain things from the past come into focus, and that's actually through your feeling for it, right? And I think, to me, that's very important in the way that we look at the film, the period, and so on, and these characters. Because if we didn't look at it through that type of gaze, it could be a really horrible. I mean, you could look at this film as a kind of a female rape of a young boy, right? Like, I mean, theoretically and in law, that is what it is, right? She's 25, he's 15, and they're falling in love, right?
I read some review that described it as grooming behavior, which I feel like is just it takes away all of the actual interest in what this relationship is.
Of course.
Just to jump in, because it's both of the points that you were making, I agree. Well, you were talking about how it constructs that partial look at that partial gaze at history. And I agree. And just to tie that to you mentioned when she runs and picks him up from the station, and that's the moment when sort of the penny drops and they both go, well, we really know how we feel about each other in this complicated, in love with each other, but sibling but age gap, etc., kind of babysitter way. Because the first thing she does for him is babysit him and chaperone him. I think I found yesterday, seeing it the second time, that shot that I remembered of him getting out of the police station and it hangs on the reflection and they hug was just the most gorgeous moment in the film. That is absolutely when you go, they really like, they love each other, and she will go straight for him when he's in that kind of danger. And it's just, yeah, that absolutely cements the thing.
And there are several shots like that. There's a similar one in the pinball place. I think there's a similar one when they're selling the water beds, right? This thing of like the reflections of the inside and the outside. And there's a different one, but a similar type of shot in the politician's office with the guy looking outside. Yeah, where the inside and outside are reflected. And then out of all those partial images, one comes into, one is highlighted. It's a very beautiful way of doing things. And of course, I do think that the whole thing of looking at as grooming is absurd, right? Like, but actually what I'm trying to say is that if we don't look at it that way, it has to do with the way that it's filmed for us, because it would be all too easy in the hands of another director to see it as precisely that. Yeah, she's 25, he's 15.
It's also, Mark said on Facebook, he saw it the other day, and he made a comment that, in his estimation, one of the reasons he found it an acceptable relationship, something that you don't question, is that it's so chaste, which I think is an interesting point.
Well, but I don't think it's chaste. I mean, I think it's full of sexual desire and longing. It's true. We don't see them rolling in bed. Yes.
Well, I think that's what he meant.
Well, he's trying to make it with her from the beginning, right? It's like, I love that moment where she agrees to do nudity in film. How can you do nudity in film and not be willing to show me your tits? Yeah. Though, of course, the punchline to that is when he wants to touch them and says, like in the movies I'd show, but nobody would touch, so you can't touch.
That was a great scene.
Yes. But the thing about the sexual desire is there kind of completely from the very beginning, but it's all from him, I must say, right? So, and that makes a difference, that it's all directed at him, that she's the one who keeps blocking him, right? So I think that's also what makes it acceptable and palatable, right? I mean, but it has to be maneuvered, and part of it is through that look, how it's presented to us, and whose point of view gets prioritized when. I think is very significant.
I found it so, because clearly it's an interesting film, and in discussion, I found it interesting. I did, while watching it, find it indulgent. I think part of it is that feeling of making a film with your mates, and not only with your mates, but with the sons and daughters of famous people who don't really appear to have earned that role, So the main character is Philip Seymour Hoffman's son, and obviously Paul Thomas Anderson knows Philip Seymour. He's previously worked with him, a friend, and all that kind of thing. The Haim family are a family band. They're all in the film. Paul Thomas Anderson has become friends with them, having made music videos for them. There's a Spielberg in there, Steven Spielberg's daughter. It's in some minor role that you wouldn't notice, but she's in there.
2 Spielbergs.
Is there another one?
I don't care.
There are 2 Spielbergs. Yeah, one of them is There's 2.
There is a feeling of playing around with your mates, and in a quite an aimless way that didn't appeal to me at all.
Okay, can I interject there? Because I find it interesting that while we value in other filmmakers, the fact that Agnès Varda could just pick up her camera and film her neighbors, and do something brilliant, all of a sudden becomes a problem when it's a Hollywood film. Because, what you're describing is just that. It's like you look at the people around you. It's not as if anybody in the film was bad. Nobody stood out. You couldn't tell a nepotist casting. The way that actually sometimes you look at those 1950s, epic films, and you think, who did she fuck to get into this film, right? Because she must be some producer's girlfriend, because she can't say a line to save her life. I never for a moment felt in this film that there was any instance of that.
No, nor did I. But I felt an aimlessness to the entire project that didn't appeal. And I think part of it is what you're saying, what you liked. You like these characters, you want to spend time with them, you like hanging out. And that's like my initial response was, I don't care about hanging out with these characters. I needed something else. And for a long time, basically, it was a few jokes here and there, which I really enjoyed. A complete lack of emotional connection to people, though. And then ultimately, finally, I got this. All of a sudden, this relationship between the politician and his boyfriend, which I found fascinating and rich and beautiful, but short-lived, and they're minor characters in the scheme of the whole thing. So that's where I spent a lot of the time feeling my patience was really being tested, because I don't care about these people, and I'm not that interested in seeing you hang out with your friends.
Were you not involved when it got to the John Peters section and it became this really brilliant no oil chase away from this guy who said he's going to kill you and you've ruined his house and he's completely out of his mind?
I thought it was really funny, a really funny whole set piece, and I really enjoyed reversing backwards down the hill.
That was one.
I mean, I thought that's never ever going to work. You would crash immediately, but there's a magic to the whole thing that, of course, they're going to survive it. Which I really enjoyed.
Her driving is fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So no, I enjoyed it, and I say there are lots of jokes and bits and pieces that I really enjoyed throughout. But I didn't feel a connection to anyone emotionally. I didn't feel like I wanted anything from anyone. I wouldn't care about anyone until I got to Benny Safdie and his boyfriend.
Mm. I love them both. I thought he was so sweet and endearing. Like, you wanted to hug him, really. Because I also like the fact that he's both cocky, he's got these terrible teeth and the acne, and he's chubby, but he's confident, right? And he's up for life, and she tries to play the mature women, whatever. Yeah, and constantly blocking him and so on, but being drawn to him somehow. And then what I thought was like a kind of a heartbreaking moment where he goes off to make it with Melody or whatever her name is. Yeah, and then she goes, she finds herself being jealous, right? And then when she looks out the window and sees that it's them doing something that we don't see what they're doing, but obviously it breaks her heart, right? And that's kind of, so you get the feeling like she really loves him, right? Like, so it's something more than just like, a sibling connection. Yeah, kind of, there's a sexual element where she's jealous. I thought that was a beautiful moment, actually. Yeah. Romantic, which actually is a question for you, because, kind of, why did you not find this romantic? Because you're usually so...
Yeah, I don't know. It wasn't Hollywood enough, maybe. Maybe it's because they ain't got good teeth. I mean, this film really makes the case for why everyone in Hollywood has fake teeth. Really. And perfect skin. In fact, at one point, I was trying to go to sleep and I took my glasses off. And because I'm short-sighted, the whole film got kind of blurred out. And I thought, wow, these people look beautiful. So much better this way. Because it really, they look like real people. To put it diplomatically.
Yeah, they do, and it's a great thing.
Yeah.
I think she's beautiful, actually, and sexy, but also she looks like a real person for sure, right? And so does he, and I think that's part of what's so wonderful and actually kind of original about the film. Yeah, I think it's a film about misfits finding each other, and part of the misfit is the age. And part of it is that they're extreme personalities, each in their own way. I mean, if they don't end up with each other, they're going to find it difficult to find another partner. Yeah. I mean, I'm not saying he wouldn't find sexual partners or girlfriends or whatever, but somebody who would put up with him, he'd find that a difficult find. Yeah. But she's perfect for him. Yeah.
Well, I want to ask you sort of the same thing that you asked me, except in reverse. At the end, when they get together and they kiss and they finally make it happen, were you moved by it?
Yes, I was moved and kind of relieved. You just find a warm glow and things work out. Yeah.
How about you, Stephen?
I think I'm moved when they're running back towards each other, and the film makes the biggest jump it's made at all, which is suddenly to intercut those two moments where they ran towards each other, 3 moments where they ran towards each other. That's when I'm moved. After that, I'm just on that tipping out at the end of the film where I think it's great and I'm so pleased, but I'm most moved when they're running back and they find each other.
That cutting was really interesting to me, actually. I did notice that because I had noticed before there's a lot of running in this film, I thought, especially, when the oil crisis happens, they can't drive and there's running back and forth. I thought there's a lot of running here. And then when the film points out the running and it cuts those 3 or 4 moments together, I thought that was a clever and quite beautiful way to express this thread. I did like the moment, an individual moment, where after the whole shit show with John Peters, Alana is sat on the curb, and she sees in the distance all the 15-year-old kids and younger with the petrol cans, and they're wanking them off, and like just being kids. And you can see this thing in her face of, why am I hanging out with these kids? What am I doing with my life?
Yeah, but on the other side of her is John Peters, and he's completely off the reservation. And you go, that's this woman. That's where she is in life. It's perfect, and it's so funny. And it's the 15-year-old sucking off petrol cans, siphoning fuel. Not siphoning fuel, are they? They're bringing fuel back from the station. Or it's this complete nutbag. That's where she's found herself.
Yeah.
The truck chase is another one of those interesting Paul Thomas Anderson set pieces, which goes back to things like an oil derrick exploding. And then in Phantom Thread, the end of the second act chase scene is a bunch of ladies standing around a table sewing a wedding dress before the next morning. And this is a car chase without any gas.
Yes.
There's something really nice about that. These central set pieces, but they're such oddities. There's never a car chase. It's something backwards and kind of goofy.
And it really worked in the cinema as well. The audience wasn't big. It was probably 8 or 9 people. But when they get back and he smashes up the Ferrari, and then the engine cuts out, you can't start the engine again, there were gasps in the audience.
Yes.
That really worked for people.
I think the audience responded to everything.
Yeah, I think they did.
I wasn't the only one kind of laughing.
No. The film got big laughs.
Yeah. So, and it was something... Again, I know, I'm an old cliche about this, but there was something about seeing it on a big screen that I think is so important for this kind of film. I mean, when The Master came out, I went to the trouble of seeing it in 70 millimeter, in London at the Odeon. I went to see it like 3 or 4 times because actually it just made such a difference, to see it. Yeah, it was something about not only the shape and the size of the screen, but the intensity of the color. Yeah, it's something that Anderson pays attention to. And in this screening, there was something about just being enveloped in the faces of, the main characters. Yeah, that I felt, I felt connected to them in a different way because, when you have this 15-year-old kid and that goofy smile and the acne and like, it's almost like you're in his head in a way, that actually seeing it on my quite large television would not have made possible. And I think it's kind of important, particularly in this film, which theoretically or objectively could be made erroneously into such a problem. Actually, being immersed in their heads is one of the things that prevents you from seeing it in that way, or warns you against kind of seeing it in that way. It would be a limiting of what you're being shown to see it in that way only.
What you're talking about with regards to the focus on the characters' faces, I noticed immediately when they meet and he's immediately trying to pursue her, it's done in these 2 long takes. There's one cut in the middle. And it's this long lens it's kind of almost swirling round them, and the focus is constantly shifting, but it's all on their faces. It's very, very, very well choreographed. It actually must have been quite difficult to do, to kind of keep it all in frame and all that for a long period of time. It works so beautifully, the kind of the shifting focus of the conversation between the 2 of them during these takes is really great. I noticed it right from the start. Like, this is all about their faces.
But to me, the faces. So I want to highlight the faces, but I don't want to limit everything to the faces, because actually the faces are just the conduit to feeling. I think what's important is what is the feelings, what these kids, who they are and what they're feeling, right? And a focus on the faces is to highlight the feeling, because those camera moves that you described, I also thought they were absolutely like fantastic. Yeah, those opening scenes, I thought, my God, and they're so long as well. And what was so interesting is that the what's outside the faces is almost out of focus. Yeah, so you do have a bit of a sense of period, but the focus is on this person and their feeling. And I thought that was kind of.
Well, we've had the period and the setting established with other shots, and now we get into this conversation, this meeting between the 2 of them. It's all about their faces, and you're right. It's so much is about Alana's looks as well, her looks and responses to things, which is what I connected to in that thing where she sees the kids wanking off the petrol cans. There's so much in her character and so much through her performance that is about the reaction to things. Whereas with the boy, it's much more active. He's reacting to things less. He's instigating more, and she reacts to them to him quite often.
What I thought was amazing about the film that made me realize what a lack it is in contemporary American cinema is that for once you have two super intelligent people, yes, that are the romantic leads. So they're not only very young, they're super intelligent and super capable. And actually, their own intelligence is sometimes a roadblock or an impediment to their romance, right? Like, yeah.
If only they could be stupider.
Well, if they didn't overanalyze so much, or kind of see 2 steps ahead of what they think is going to happen, they wouldn't have so much problems. And he says it about her at the beginning. You always repeat everything twice. Because actually, she repeats it twice because you see her almost actively thinking about it, right?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, and setting up a trap for him the second time, right? Like, these are hyper intelligent people. Yeah, and that's not what you see in 10 Things I Know About Her. She's all that, or blah blah blah. Right? This could be a teen film.
Well, part of the difference is that they're not just thinking about the romantic comedy side of their lives. It's not a rom-com where all they think about is, I just can't get a man.
Yes.
It's like, no, she's got plenty of things to deal with, and she happens to get involved with this kid, and their lives are involved with each other, and it's complicated. And part of that is the fact that he loves her and wants to be with her, and she's older than him and doesn't want to be with him. But she's, it's one of many things that go on in their lives.
Yes.
And one of those things for her is her political interests that develop later on, which I think is interesting because that also comes right after that bit where the kids are playing around with the petrol cans and being immature, I think, just about then. And that becomes a vector for a more intelligent kind of view of the world, a way to interact with the world. I think that she asks at one point to her sister, why am I hanging out with these 15-year-olds? Do you think it's weird that I'm hanging out with them? And the sister doesn't mind. And she goes, no, I think it is weird, that I'm doing this. And she has that moment where they see the oil crisis on TV. The kid has no clue, but she's like, this is really important and it's going to affect our business because the things are made of vinyl.
Mm-hmm.
And when she gets into the political world, you see completely why she gets connected with that immediately, why she wants to be there, and how she feels it's something that she could be doing in her life that is missing the way she's spending it at the moment, and that it's something that the relationship with the boy can't offer her. He's interested in pinball and waterbeds and trying to be an actor.
Yeah, that's when they have their fight.
Yeah.
But and Gary's point, crucially, is that he says, you wouldn't be where you are if it weren't for me. And that's also true.
Yeah.
And that's what's so brilliant about it's not about whether or not they kiss and get together at the end. It's not a question of that. It's a question of what just them even more understanding what their relationship means to each other. That's almost why it seems to be this running together after the police station and then running together after this at the end. It's I agree. This doesn't seem like something that she'll drop. But it points out it's one of the things that it points out just how big the age gap is between them, and she does need to get her life together in a way that he doesn't. But he's still building a pinball palace after another business failed, and it's
which did it fail because you imagine he made a lot of money actually before it collapsed. Yeah, and that it collapsed.
Oh, the pinball business.
No, the waterbed.
The waterbed.
The waterbed. I think the waterbed thing is something that he made a lot of money on, and then it disappeared.
Yeah.
Right, so I don't see it as like something having failed. He moved on to something else.
Something that I would say about that, though, which occurred to me in the film as something I felt was lacking, was detail and context around that. Actually, as you say, you can imagine it did quite well, but what I would say is you have to imagine. You don't get a very detailed impression of actually how this runs. So when the vinyl thing happens and the oil crisis comes in, it's going to affect our business because all these are made from vinyl. I kind of... it seems kind of banal, but I kind of want an impression of, do they have stock? Is it that they need more? How are they going to, what can they sell what they've got? I felt that as a lack.
To me, that wasn't the problem. And again, to go back to the thing about the family that we kind of disagreed on at the beginning, the way, so you found it very detailed. I didn't. I thought a couple of things evoke a lot, and you have to imagine that. So, for example, and I could be wrong, right? But, just from a few lines that you piece together in the film, like, I imagine the father of having been like a kind of a European Jew exiled to Israel. Why? A, he's still got an accent. B, he learned all those Israeli military moves, right? And then he's in LA. So she's not only becoming Americanized, but having to fight the father on all these grounds, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, and actually, I'm just imagining all that from a few lines of dialogue, right?
I know what you
know,
mean. I mean, I didn't
and
say I
I
found it
find that a
detailed.
richness.
Well, yeah, that's it. I didn't say I found it detailed. I said I found it rich. The disagreement that I had with you was it felt like more than just a few lines of dialogue. But I think we essentially agree on how that home life is built up. I think we agree a little bit less on what it means for her. I think it gives her a good reason to want to do something different, which is go on this date, and you feel less of that. But I think we essentially agree on how it's conveyed.
Yes. I mean, I was thinking about the father because, if you see, how old is he in the film? 55?
It's got to be something like that.
Yeah.
50s, 60s, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah. If he is a European Jew who had to immigrate to Israel after, he would have been 25, 30 in 1945.
Mm-hmm.
And it just brings up all kinds of interesting things that are on the basis of 3 lines, and which you could be wrong, right? Yeah, but there are things in the film that suggest this deeper context and also establish a relationship between her and her father.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Kind of that he's set in his ways for very particular reasons that she doesn't see. Yeah. That Nixon's America for her, is quite different than what it might mean for her father.
The idea you're getting at being for the father, it's opportunity and escape from something much worse, and for a young person who's growing up there, we see Vietnam.
Well, if he's known World War II and Nazism, not to say concentration camps or whatever, she's probably just like a spoiled brat who's like an old maid and is making his life. Why is she so difficult? She's got everything, right? Like, yeah. So anyway, I think the film, could be analyzed forever in those ways, actually, because, I mean, some of these things are very deliberate. Some, I'm sure, are happy coincidences that were brought together in editing. But it does feel like a film that feels very worked through. All those shots at the beginning with the use of focus is not an accident. It's clearly very carefully planned. And on the other hand, kind of very loose in terms of like performance and movement and and very alive. I mean, I think those kids are absolutely terrific in kind of making it alive. So, I mean, I think for me, it's, it's the best of all possible combinations. And then having this romanticism and this warmth that is based on intelligence and real feeling rather than some stupidity and some not real feeling, like some cliche of how things should be rather than the way that things are. You also get a sense of pain and difficulty and, misunderstandings in a much rawer way in this film than is usual in American cinema.
Part of what makes that combination possible so that it can be technically incredibly controlled and precise in some ways, but really, really free and real when it comes to performances is that he seems to have honed this lighting and camera crew and grip crew over the years into this sort of... Stanley Kubrick worked with quite a small crew by the end, a small core crew. For films that are as impressive and sort of vast as they are, he had a very small core crew. And I think Paul Thomas Anderson seems to have worked with these people and winnowed a crew down, which means that it can be as direct from him onto getting a camera into a position and doing quite complicated things really smoothly. And you can see that if you go back and watch... I mean, if you go back and watch his films over the years, but particularly Phantom Thread into the music videos and things like Anima, which is this Netflix short he did recently.
Oh, yeah.
You can see that style developing, and and obviously he's actually credited on screen as co-DOP of this, which is I think basically a cosmetic difference to Phantom Thread, where he's still co-DOP, which is a very rare thing. You only get that with very few directors, and I think it's a really interesting thing.
Was he not the sole DOP on Phantom Thread?
I don't think he was. I think they have the way he describes it and the way his team seems to describe it is that it's sort of a collaborative thing. I think one of them probably has the actual light meter and decides on stops, and one of them probably has final say on other things. But it's a collaborative thing. There isn't one DOP deciding what light goes where. It's sort of a group dynamic.
No, but as far as credits go, was he not credited on his own?
No, he's co on this.
No.
There's a guy called Michael Bauman.
Yeah, no, I mean on Phantom Thread. I know he was definitely co-credited on this. I'm just checking Phantom Thread.
On Phantom Thread, he's credited. He has a British credit. It's lighting cameraman Mike Bauman, which I think is
okay.
partly. It might be to do with unions here, but I like lighting cameraman because that's kind of a 40s, 50s. Like it's an old-fashioned term.
Yeah, it's cinema.
It's like calling someone script girl.
IMDb says he's DOP uncredited.
What do you call script girl now?
Continuity.
I think it would be called continuity. You wouldn't have script girl on screen because it's
I know.
It might not be a girl.
I was just curious.
I think it's
Yeah,
continuity or continuity
control
supervisor.
advisor or something like that.
All right. So you've seen it twice, Stephen. What did you get the second time?
I found this similarly with The Master, weirdly enough. I think I saw much more directly how one scene led to another scene, led to another scene. So it didn't feel as fragmented. I saw how this interaction between them led to this next decision and then moving to over here and then to over there. It seemed much more logical how it moved from scene to scene. Whereas after the first time, it was such a sort of rush of different things and we'd been all over the place and it felt much more like it dipped into this story and then got distracted and just dipped into this one. This time it felt much more linear.
I want to ask one last thing which occurred to me, which is the guy who's married to the Japanese wives, who runs a Japanese restaurant.
Yeah.
The joke in his character is that he doesn't speak Japanese and he thinks that putting on this kind of mock Japanese accent, speaking English, is somehow communicating with his wife. And then he doesn't translate what they say because he can't. And the moment that happens for the first time, it's such a shock and it's so silly. I really laughed.
Yeah.
It started to feel really racist after that because that was the only joke and it didn't develop and they kept on playing it.
No, it developed.
No, it didn't.
Yes, it did. It developed the second time because you realize that's not his wife. It's just a girl that he hires. Yeah.
Well, that doesn't make the joke any less racist to me.
It makes it more racist. But I think that's the problem. But I think it's very deliberate. Yeah, like these women to him are interchangeable. He's hiring them, probably sleeping with them, right? Yeah, but they're different women.
Yeah.
It also develops at the end of during the second scene. He says he doesn't actually translate, or he says that he doesn't understand Japanese, which is a minor development, which he didn't say the first time.
He didn't say it the first time, but it was obvious the first time.
Yes, I thought it was a reference to those Ben Hanna restaurants of the 70s. Yeah, you used to get ads kind of like that. I mean, I think there's at least a slight reference to that. And I do think that it is quite racist and that, the racism is deliberate.
Well, it started, immediately it was funny and it became unacceptable very quickly. And I think the film overplayed its hand in that joke.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I've thought about that quite a bit. Yeah, I'm not sure whether because it's outrageous the first time and then... So much of, but there's a lot going on between his quote unquote wife and Gary's mum at that point. It's a really difficult one. I don't know how many times you can do that tastefully or how much you have to quote unquote excuse it. It's I'm not sure. And obviously I'm sympathetic towards the filmmaker, so I'm trying to find a way to make it acceptable. So it's hard to say. It's such an outrageous thing and it's presented realistically. If anything, I'm confused by, does he think he's speaking Japanese? Is he that stupid?
Well, to me, the thing about the film is that the butt of the joke is him and his racism.
Yeah.
It's not the women.
Yeah, exactly.
This is just what I was going to say. I don't think he's enough the butt of the joke for it to really
I think
sell.
he is clearly, because you get the sense the woman wants to talk about the sashimi and and the food, right? And all that stuff. So he is the butt of the joke.
I do know what you mean, and I think the film wants him to be the butt of the joke, but I don't think it sells it enough.
Well,
it needs to be more emphatic about that somehow, and it's not.
Well, I don't see how you could be more emphatic, really.
I can agree with you. I agree with you in part, but I also think that you'd potentially be criticizing the film the other way if it punished him in a way that the film isn't interested in doing. It's not about making acceptable these parts of the past, which are part of the texture of living when the film is set. His is so that particular moment is so egregious because it's I don't know if it's egregious. It's so outrageous because it's such an extraordinary thing to hear. But I have no doubt that it's quite historically accurate for what it's worth. I don't know whether or not I agree with that. Whether or not I think we would be criticizing the film in the reverse if it made acceptable these parts of the past. But whether or not it opens itself up in a negative way, the more you do the joke and the more you allow for us to, let's say, enjoy the racist joke, that's a hard one because everybody's going to be different. Is it worth that risk?
I'd rather criticise the film for being anti-racist than indulging in a racist joke, which I think
the film is
ultimately it does.
I think the film is anti-racist. I mean, this is the thing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it is making him the butt of the joke. It's also highlighting the very casual racism of the period, right? Because you know, he doesn't think he's being racist. He's kind of, you know, making his money selling Japanese food, of which, you know, he lived in Japan, you know, and so on. He's kind of giving all of these, you know, reasons why he's such a friend of Japan and completely being unconscious of his own racism, which the film points out. I mean, I don't want to go overboard on the defense. You know, I found it very funny.
Yeah, I think that is being overgenerous, though, to say the film is pointing out racism of the period. There are so many ways of doing that, and to do this wild racist joke, and then, in my view, and it's an instinctive view, to not feel like it's doing enough to undercut it and show you that the joke is on him.
I think the film makes it very clear that the joke is on him, and I think it's one thing, you know, to make you know, to get a laugh out of the racist mores of the period, than to condone or support the racist mores of the period, which I don't think the film does.
No, I agree. The film is absolutely not doing that, and it will be nuts to think that it was, and it will be nuts for it to do that. I just think it's badly judged, to put it that way. I think it doesn't do it right.
It got a laugh out of me.
It got a laugh out of me at first. I thought it was fucking
got a laugh
wild.
out of me. It's really funny.
So, there you go. But it didn't get a laugh out of me the second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth times.
Oh, I only did it one more time.
I mean, each individual line.
Which is something in and of itself. You actually sit and you listen to this and you notice the stench that it creates, even in the room in the film, because it's like Gary's mum knows that this is not really right, and his wife thinks he's a quote unquote wife. It never occurred to me that she might not be his wife. She's completely disgusted by the whole thing, but she can't say anything or doesn't say anything. And it's partly you just watch how this turd that's been laid sits in the room, as well as in the cinema, where there's a huge hurdle at the beginning, which is the utter outrageousness of him doing this.
But think of how complex that is, because actually the mother's own lack of awareness and, you know, and her implicit racism and sexism. Yes, her highlighting the hostesses and the prettiness of the hostesses, and somehow giving the implying that they will be available with the sashimi, right? Like, which is then pointed out to her, right? So it's not just him, it's also her. And actually, in it being about him and her, it is something about America, where this this Japanese woman, who in fact, you know, is very explicitly stating her own views, nonetheless has no say. All right, we should wrap it up.
Yeah, have you got anything else on your mind, Stephen?
I'm good.
All right. Anyway, lovely to see you and lovely to have you with us.
Yeah, this was good fun.
Thanks very much for joining us. I'm glad you were here. It's a much richer discussion with you here. You like the film a lot. You've seen it a couple of times. So I'm really glad that you were here with us, Stephen.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Stephen, for joining us. We are eavesdropping at the movies, and we are on
Apple Podcasts, Audible, Google Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, and YouTube. On social media, we're on Facebook and Twitter. And the website is eavesdroppingatthemovies.com.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.